The Silver Crown by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 26, The White-Haired King. She noticed three things immediately when she entered the throne room. A golden door glowing like sunlight on the far side of the room. A black crown sparkling with evil little red stones. The king. The crown was on the king's head, and the king was asleep. He stared at Ellen as she came in, and he spoke to her, but he was asleep for all that. His eyes were black glass marbles, and there was no expression in his voice. It was the flat mechanical voice of the record she had just heard with the same precise English accent. It said, "Step forward 3 paces." Ellen did as she was told. "Stop there." She stopped, perhaps 6 feet away from the king, who sat in an armchair covered in gold cloth so that it looked rather like a throne, but not much. There was silence while the king stared at her, inch by inch, as if memorizing her for future reference. He looked particularly long into her eyes, and Ellen felt he was trying, through them, to see her thoughts. Her thoughts were, at the moment, primarily surprise and curiosity, for the king did not look at all as she had expected. Here was no sinister Captain Julio, but an extraordinarily beautiful young man with hair so blonde it looked white. He wore no black uniform, but a loose-knit green sweater and tweedy-looking slacks. Young? Perhaps not. With the color of his hair, he could have been 25 or 65. In another minute he removed the crown from his head. And then he woke up. He blinked his eyes, rubbed them, and stared again, as if he had not seen her before. Now his eyes assumed expression, and she noticed they were a lovely shade of blue. "Come in," he said, though she was already in. "So you're the one who can't be reached." His voice, too, had lost its flatness, though not its English accent. "Excuse me?" Ellen did not know what he meant. "Brother Michael told me all about it. A thorough man, though perhaps a bit simple-minded. Forced 20 and no effect at all. Well, I don't know what that means. We don't either, yet, but I'll tell you this. You're the first to do it. You must have a most unusual mind, and that's what we're interested in." He stood up, placing the crown carefully on a little jade-topped table beside the throne chair. Ellen could see that except for the colors, it was an exact duplicate of hers. The throne room, unlike the other rooms in the tower, had one entire wall of glass, the bay windows she had seen from outside. Thrusting his fists into his pockets, the king walked over to these and stared out. He did not look at all like a king, but rather like a scholar. "I suppose you're thinking I don't look much like a king." He spoke rather wistfully, and with the faintest of smiles. "You're right, of course. I wasn't cut out for the job. Do you know, I even have ceremonial robes. The title has its uses, of course, in dealing with the lower echelons. But with you, I think all of that isn't necessary." He smiled at her with the most charming candor, and Ellen was captivated and relieved. The king continued, "I suppose we should get down to business. Did you understand all you heard in the briefing room?" "Briefing room?" "The green room you just left." Ellen thought before answering. "I think I understood it all, except... Except what's it all for? What does it have to do with me? Why do I have to be part of it? I don't want to." The king left the window and walked back to Ellen. His blue eyes looked at her gently, and he seemed disappointed and yet very sweet about it, and patient, so that she felt almost sorry for what she had said. "Of course you don't want to. Not yet, but you don't know enough about it. As you said, you don't know what it's for. You need to see a little bit of what we call Phase 2. Meanwhile, I'll tell you this. You are, if you don't mind my saying so, a sort of monkey wrench." "I don't understand that either." "A small one, perhaps, but you can jam the gear. You don't fit into our plan. You see, you should have got in tune when you stood on that screen yesterday, and you didn't. Why not, and how many more are there like you?" "If I don't fit into the plan," said Ellen hopefully, "why don't you just let me go away?" "I'm afraid we couldn't risk that." The king really sounded regretful. "Not with Phase 2 almost ready to begin, but, of course, you don't know what Phase 2 is yet. Let's get on with that. First, you are to be allowed to see the machine. Not many do that." And he walked to the golden door and opened it. The room beyond was no bigger than a closet, and it was lined in black velvet like the inside of a jewel box. On a velvet table in its center stood the Hieronymus machine. Ellen looked at it and drew in her breath. Its heart was a single glowing globe the size of a basketball, smoky as an opal. It flickered and changed color constantly, from pale green to blue to deepest purple and back again. Its hard, perfectly spherical edges seemed to melt and flow beneath the eye. One had the feeling that if one looked at it long enough, one would see everything there was to see. The globe rested on a small gold pedestal in a field of blackest obsidian, and this field was so heavily contrived as to appear embroidered. Wires and tubes of silver, gold, and copper intertwined through it in patterns of terrifying complexity. They were not, one could see, designed to please the eye, but to serve the great central globe. Over the whole device, like a witch's hat, rose a cone of woven black wire. Ellen stared at it in dread. It was beautiful, but it was also horrible. It seemed to have a life of its own, and it made her think of some monstrous, malevolent spider shining in a dark web. "Who made that?" she asked in an awed voice. "We don't know. I don't suppose we ever will. A monk, or several monks, as they called themselves. We would probably use the word sorcerers. They claimed to be following the teachings of Hieronymus. Perhaps they were. They built this more than 1,000 years ago. When I found it, it was in a cave, buried in a stone box with a slab of marble on top. How they got that slab on there, I don't know. I had to hire a crane to lift it off. Even so, the case had been looted." "Looted? How could you tell?" But Ellen had guessed the answer already. "There was a parchment with the machine, rolled up, mildewed, cracked, and covered with Latin writing. I was able to decipher most of it. It said that 2 crowns had been buried with the machine, one black, one silver. The silver one was missing." Ellen turned her face away so he could not see, in case she was turning pale. She felt pale. Was this all a trick, then? Did he know about her crown? And was it really the same crown? Somehow she felt sure that it was. There was a new sense of danger in the air. But the king's voice continued calmly enough. That was more than a monkey wrench. It was a disaster, for without the silver crown the whole Hieronymus plan was threatened. I didn't know that at the time, of course, not even that there was a plan. But it was true just the same. And I know it now," Ellen said, trying to keep her voice calm. "How was it threatened?" But the king answered rather evasively, "It's nothing for you to be concerned about. We've located the crown now, and we know that we will acquire it eventually. We must acquire it." Now Ellen began to understand a lot of things, and again she hoped her face would not betray her. For some reason they had to have her crown. That was why Captain Julio had chased her, and that was why Mr. Gates had given her a ride. He must have known all the time that she had it in her handbag. And then came the chilling thought. That was why her house had been burned down. She remembered the arson lesson, and she realized with horror that the king was in charge of that and everything else. This kindly, patient, cultured man had ordered her family burned. Yet she realized she must not permit herself to make any sign that she knew this. If she did, her chance of rescuing Otto and escape would end instantly. She groped desperately for something to say. She looked at the machine again. "Is this," she spoke in a rather gulping voice, "is this machine part of Phase 2? It takes your breath away, doesn't it?" The king glanced sideways at her. "It took mine, too, when I first saw it." He did not seem suspicious. "No, this is not Phase 2, but you need to see it to understand Phase 2. Well, look at that now. Perhaps you've guessed what it is." But Ellen had not guessed. The king led the way back into the green room. The briefing chamber touched a spot on the wall, and the elevator appeared. They rode upward. "We have 4 more floors above this one," he said. "And they're busy places right now. Top secret, too, I might add." They got off at the next floor. It was a workshop, and it was busy indeed. Around the wall were workbenches and tables, and at them, hard at work, never speaking, never looking up, were craftsmen, no children these, but gray-haired men with skilled fingers. They were, it seemed, completely hypnotized, in tune, for not one of them was aware of the king's presence, or Ellen's. The king walked to one of the benches and picked up one of several objects that lay on it. He handed it to Ellen. "There you are," he said. "That's a bit of Phase 2. "But it's a doll!" "Look at the eyes." Ellen looked at the eyes, who stared back at her blankly as dolls' eyes do. They seemed ordinary enough. Baby blue with black round pupils in the center. "The pupils," the king explained, "are pure malignite. just one of these dolls in a little girl's house, and she's ours, along with her whole family and the family next door, too, if they live close enough. He moved to another bench and handed Ellen a wristwatch. It had black hands and little black dots that marked the minutes. Malignite won't make watch gears, said the king, but it works beautifully on the face. On the other benches, the craftsmen were making other objects, toy soldiers with black beady eyes, costume jewelry set with sparkling glass stones of red and blue and green, but always here and there a black stone too. Pilot models, of course. We won't attempt mass production. We don't need to, you see. When we give one of our wristwatches to a watch manufacturer and he puts it on, from that minute he'll manufacture watches as we tell him to. Furthermore, he'll pay us for the malignite he puts in them. It's a beautifully simple plan, as you can see. In a year or so there will be millions of malignite watches and dolls and toys and other things as well. There's no reason why a little malignite shouldn't be used in every automobile, for instance, and every refrigerator. Will the manufacturers put it in? They will as soon as one of their daughters is given a doll with malignant eyes. It was, as he said, beautifully simple, yet it took time for Ellen to grasp it. The size of the plan, the enormity, the dreadfulness of it crept through her mind slowly, the way a sunset slowly darkens the countryside. Malignite everywhere, in every home, in every automobile, like a horrible disease spreading through the world. Then she thought she saw a flaw in the idea. But, she said, all the people who use those things, you can't bring them all here. There isn't enough room. No, answered the king. No, agreed the king cheerfully. You're absolutely right. But then you see we won't need to. He summoned the elevator and they went up one more flight. When they got out, they were again in a workshop like the one below, but with a difference. Here there was no variety at all. There were 24 craftsmen working with swift and calm efficiency, each under the complete and perfect control of a machine in the throne room below, and on the work table, in front of each man, nearly complete, stood a Hieronymus machine. Even the king, who had been here before, seemed awed in this hushed chamber. 24 more, he said in a quiet voice, and in another week, when they are finished, each one of them can start making another 24, and so on, and in a few months we'll have one for every city, one for every village. Now you can see why you are to become part of the plan, because everyone in the world is to become part of it. End of chapter 26.